The little girl's fork clattered onto the diner floor. She bent to grab it and knocked her water glass off the table, and it shattered across the tiles. The whole place went quiet. A tired man dropped to his knees to gather the pieces before his daughter could reach them and cut herself. "It's okay," he kept saying, "it's okay, baby, don't touch it." His hands were shaking. Not from the glass. From 2 jobs and no sleep, and from the words he'd said out loud in the truck an hour before, that he was done, that he gave up on love for good. That was Nathan Cole, 38 years old, and he had no idea that in 10 seconds a woman across that diner was going to stand up and walk straight toward him. What she did next stopped the whole room cold. Stay with me on this one. Now, to understand why a grown man would swear off love in the cab of a truck, you have to understand what the last 5 years had done to Nathan Cole. 5 years back, Nathan had a whole life. A wife named Diane. A house with a real yard. A job at the plant that paid enough to breathe. And a brand new baby girl named Lily, born too early, born so small the doctors weren't sure she'd make it through the first week. That's where it all started to come apart. Lily spent the first 2 months of her life in the hospital, in a little plastic box with wires and tubes, fighting for every breath. Nathan barely left. He'd work his shift at the plant, then drive straight to the hospital and sit by that incubator half the night, watching the numbers on the monitors, learning to read them, holding his breath every time an alarm went off. He slept in a plastic chair more nights than he slept in his own bed. And the bills. Lord, the bills. Every day that baby stayed in that unit, the number climbed. By the time Lily came home healthy, Nathan and Diane owed more money than Nathan made in 3 years. But he didn't care about the money. His daughter was alive. He'd have paid it 10 times over and considered it the best deal he ever made. Diane felt different. Now here's the thing about hard times. They don't create who a person is. They reveal it. And what those months revealed about Diane was something Nathan hadn't wanted to see. She'd married him for the easy version of life. The house, the yard, the steady plant job, the picture of a family. She had not signed up for a sick baby and a mountain of debt and a husband who came home too tired to talk. She stopped coming to the hospital. Said she couldn't bear to see the baby like that, which sounded like grief but Nathan slowly understood was something colder. And little by little, she checked out. She started staying out late. Then staying out all night. She stopped holding Lily. And one morning, when Lily was barely a year old, Nathan came home from a double shift to find a note on the kitchen table and half the closet empty. Diane was gone. She'd run off with a man she'd met, a man who had money and no debt, and no crying baby to keep him up at night. She didn't ask for custody. That's the part that tells you everything you need to know. She didn't even ask to visit. She just left, like Lily was part of the life she was shedding, like a coat she'd outgrown. So Nathan did what a man does. He got up the next morning, and he took care of his daughter. He lost the house, because he couldn't carry it alone. Moved into a cramped apartment on the bad side of town, 2 rooms and a kitchen you could barely turn around in. He picked up a second job, driving deliveries at night after his shift at the plant, sleeping in 3-hour pieces, sometimes less. He learned to braid hair off a video on his phone, sitting on the bathroom floor practicing on a doll until he got it right, because Lily wanted braids like the other girls. He learned which cereal she liked and which she'd throw on the floor. He learned to fake being awake at 7 in the morning when he'd gotten home at 5. He went to every school thing, every single one, even when he was so tired he could barely stand, because he'd promised himself that little girl would never once feel like she was missing a parent, even though she was. And he never dated. Not once in 5 years. At first it was because there was no time, and that was true. Then it was because there was no money, and that was true too. A man working 2 jobs to keep the lights on doesn't have a lot to offer somebody. But somewhere in there it became something else. It became a wall. Nathan had loved somebody with everything he had, given her his whole heart and his whole back, and she'd walked out the second it got hard. And he had decided, way down deep where he never said it out loud, that love was a luxury for other people. People with money. People with easy lives and clean hands. Not for a broke single dad who smelled like a delivery truck and hadn't slept a full night in half a decade. He told himself he didn't need it. He had Lily. She was enough. She was more than enough. And most days he believed it. But you can only carry a thing like that so long before it starts to crack. And that night, in the truck outside the diner, it cracked. Lily had asked him, out of nowhere, in that way kids do that knocks the wind right out of you, why he didn't have anybody the way her friend's daddy had somebody. And Nathan had sat there in the dark, engine ticking, hands on the wheel, and something in his chest that he'd been holding shut for 5 years just gave out all at once. And he'd said it. Quiet. To the windshield, more than to her. I give up on love, baby. It's not for guys like me. Let's just go get you some pancakes. He didn't think she really heard him. And he didn't think it meant anything, just a tired man talking to a windshield. He didn't know Lily heard the sad underneath the words. He didn't know she'd remember it, or that it would sit in her small chest and worry her. And he sure didn't know that inside that diner, a woman was about to see the two of them walk in, and recognize a face she'd spent 5 years praying she'd see again. They took a booth in the back. Nathan counted the change in his pocket and told Lily she could get whatever she wanted, which meant pancakes, and he got himself coffee and said he wasn't hungry, which was a lie he told a lot. That's when Lily dropped the fork. And the glass. And Nathan hit his knees on that diner floor, gathering broken pieces with shaking hands, and for one bad second, the whole weight of 5 years sat right on top of him and he thought he might not be able to get back up. And then a pair of shoes stopped right in front of him. He looked up. A woman was standing over the booth. Well-dressed, kind-faced, maybe 35. A stranger. And she wasn't looking at Nathan at all. She was staring at Lily like she'd seen a ghost. "Can I help you?" Nathan said, guarded, pulling Lily a little closer. Years of hard living had taught him to be wary of strangers who took too much interest in his kid. But the woman didn't answer him. She stepped past him, slow, like she was afraid the moment might break. And then she did the thing that stopped the whole diner cold. She knelt down. Right there on the floor, in her nice clothes, in the broken glass. She knelt down until she was eye to eye with a 5-year-old girl. And her voice came out shaking. "Lily," she said. "Is your name Lily?" Nathan's whole body went tight. "How do you know my daughter's name?" he said. The woman looked up at him then, and her eyes were full. "You don't remember me," she said. "There's no reason you would. You were out of your mind with worry back then. But I remember her. I remember this little girl like it was yesterday." If this story's already got a hold on you, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Because who this woman turned out to be is something Nathan never in 100 years saw coming, and it's the reason his whole life was about to change. "My name is Grace," the woman said, still down on the floor beside Lily. "Grace Bennett. 5 years ago, I was a nurse in the neonatal unit at Mercy General. I took care of your daughter. For 2 months. She was the smallest baby on that whole ward." Nathan's mouth went dry. The room seemed to tilt under him. Because he did remember Mercy General. He remembered those 2 months like a nightmare he'd never fully woken up from. The beeping machines. The tiny body no bigger than his 2 hands. The nights he'd slept in a plastic chair because he couldn't stand to leave her alone in that plastic box. But the faces. The faces were a blur. He'd been so terrified, so exhausted, so buried under fear and bills and no sleep, that the doctors and nurses had all run together into one long smear of scrubs and quiet voices and bad coffee at 3 in the morning. He didn't remember Grace. But Grace remembered them. "I was her night nurse," Grace said. "I had her most nights for those 2 months. And I want you to know something, because I don't think anyone ever told you. She was a fighter. That baby fought harder than any child I ever saw come through that ward. There were nights we didn't think she'd make it to morning. Nights I called the doctor in and we all held our breath. And she made it anyway. Every single time. I used to talk to her through the dark, when it was just the 2 of us and the machines. I'd tell her to keep fighting. Tell her there was a daddy down the hall who wasn't going anywhere. And she did. She kept fighting." Grace's voice broke clean in half. "I left nursing 3 years ago," she said. "Burned out. You see so many babies you can't save, you carry every one of them, and one day you just can't carry another. And I always wondered, about the ones who made it, whether it mattered. Whether they went home and had good lives or whether I just prolonged something sad. I thought about your daughter more than any of them. The tiny fighter from the corner incubator. I never knew her name for sure, never knew what became of her. And then I walk into a diner on an ordinary Tuesday 5 years later, and there she is. Dropping a fork on the floor. Alive. Healthy. Ordinary. Do you understand what that is to me? Do you have any idea what you just handed me, walking through that door?" Nathan Cole, who had not cried in front of another adult in 5 years, felt his eyes burn. The whole diner was silent. A waitress had stopped mid-pour. Because everybody in that room understood they were watching something rare. A woman had spent 5 years wondering if her work meant anything. And the answer to that question was sitting in a booth eating pancakes, alive because of her. Grace stayed. Of course she stayed. She slid into the booth across from Nathan and Lily, and she ordered a coffee, and she and Nathan talked while Lily colored on her placemat, occasionally looking up at this woman who seemed to know her, who kept looking at her like she was a miracle, which it turned out she was. They talked for an hour. Then 2. The pancakes got cold and nobody cared. Grace told stories about the ward, funny ones, the good ones, and Nathan found himself laughing, a rusty sound he hadn't made in front of another grown-up in longer than he could remember. And when they finally stood to go, Grace crouched down one more time and told Lily she was the bravest person she'd ever met, and Lily, who had no memory of any of it, just grinned and showed her the picture she'd drawn. And here's the thing. It should have ended right there. A beautiful moment in a diner on an ordinary Tuesday. A story Nathan would tell for years, the one about the nurse who saved his baby, found again by pure chance over cold pancakes. They exchanged numbers, the way people do when they don't quite want a thing to be over, and they went their separate ways into the night, and it would have made a lovely story all on its own. But it didn't end there. Because life doesn't tie things up that clean, and the hardest part of Nathan Cole's story was still coming for him. 3 weeks after that night, Nathan Cole got a letter that turned his whole world upside down. It came in a stiff envelope from a law office downtown, the kind of envelope that never carries good news. Nathan almost threw it out, figuring it was about the old hospital debt come back around again. But he opened it, standing at his kitchen counter after a double shift. And what he read made him sit down hard in a kitchen chair, the paper shaking in his hand. Diane was back. And she wanted Lily. Not because she loved her. Nathan knew that in his bones, knew it the way you know your own name. Diane had married Rich, the man she'd run off with, and it turned out that man wanted children of his own and couldn't have them. So Diane had remembered, all of a sudden, conveniently, that she had a daughter out there somewhere. And now she and her wealthy husband, with their big house and their circular driveway and their expensive downtown lawyer, were filing for custody of the little girl she'd walked away from without a backward glance 5 years before. The letter laid it out cold. They would argue that Nathan was an unfit father. That he worked 2 jobs and was never home to be a real parent. That Lily was being raised in a cramped apartment on the bad side of town by a man too broke and too exhausted to give her the life she deserved. That she'd be better off with her mother and a stepfather who could give her private school, a big bedroom, everything money could buy. And the worst part. The part that made Nathan's hands shake so bad he had to set the letter down. Legally, they had a case. A real one. A judge looking at a spreadsheet, just the cold numbers on a page, would see a wealthy 2-parent home on one side and a broke single dad running on no sleep on the other. On paper, Diane looked like the better bet. On paper, the woman who abandoned her sick baby looked like the safe choice. Nathan sat at that table half the night. He'd fought through everything. The sick baby. The debt that still followed him. The lost house. The double shifts that took years off his life. He'd fought through every bit of it and never once, not for a single second, thought about giving up. But this. Losing Lily to the very woman who'd thrown her away like she was nothing. This was the one thing in the world that could actually break him, and Diane knew it, and she'd aimed straight for it. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't afford a lawyer. Not a real one, not the kind you need against money like that. Diane's husband could buy the best in the state and never feel it. And Nathan Cole, for the first time in 5 long years of carrying everything by himself, felt truly, completely alone in the dark of that little kitchen. Except he wasn't alone. Not anymore. He just hadn't understood that yet. Because he'd made one friend in that diner 3 weeks back. One phone number he hadn't quite let himself call. And when he finally did, out of sheer desperation, at nearly midnight, and told Grace in a cracking voice what was happening, she didn't hesitate for even 1 second. "You are not losing that little girl," Grace said. "Not while I have breath in my body. Do you hear me? I fought for her once before, when she was 2 pounds in an incubator and the whole world had counted her out, and I am not going to stand by and watch somebody take her from the one parent who actually stayed. Tell me exactly what you need. We are going to fight this, and we are going to win." And Grace, it turned out, was not just anybody. She'd left nursing, yes. But she hadn't left helping people. She'd gone back to school, and she now worked as a patient advocate, which meant she spent her days helping families navigate exactly this kind of cold, grinding system, fighting hospitals and insurance companies and bureaucracies on behalf of people with no money and no power and no idea how to fight back. She knew how these battles worked from the inside. She knew people. And she had spent 3 years learning how to win the ones that looked hopeless on paper. The first thing she did was find Nathan a lawyer. Not a cheap one, not a tired public defender with 60 other cases. A good one, a sharp family attorney Grace knew from her advocacy work, a woman who took the case for almost nothing because Grace asked her to, and because the story of a mother abandoning a sick baby and coming back 5 years later for a rich man's convenience made her genuinely furious. The second thing Grace did was start building the truth. Because Diane's lawyer was going to tell a story with numbers. Bank statements. Square footage. Private school brochures. And Grace knew the only way to beat a story told with numbers was a story told with truth, told so plainly that no amount of money could talk over it. She got Lily's old medical records from Mercy General, every page. She tracked down 2 other nurses who'd worked that ward 5 years back, nurses who still remembered the young father who slept in the plastic chair every single night for 2 months and never once, not one time, went home to an empty bed instead. She got Lily's teachers to write letters about a happy, healthy, well-loved little girl who talked about her daddy like he'd personally hung the moon and stars. She documented 5 straight years of a man who worked himself to the bone and never missed a single school play, a single doctor's appointment, a single bedtime he could possibly be home for. And she found the thing that mattered most of all. She found the record of Diane. Or rather, the absence of one. 5 years of nothing. 5 years of a woman who had not called, not written, not sent so much as a birthday card, not paid $1 of support, not asked a single time how her daughter was doing or whether she was even still alive. Until the exact day she needed a child to patch up her new marriage. The hearing came on a gray morning in the county courthouse. Diane was there, in expensive clothes, with her wealthy husband and a lawyer who cost more per hour than Nathan made in a week. She didn't look at Nathan. She barely looked at Lily. And Nathan, sitting there in his one good shirt, felt his heart going like a hammer, because everything, his whole world, came down to the next hour. Diane's lawyer went first, and he did exactly what Grace said he'd do. He painted Nathan as a failure with a soft, reasonable voice. 2 jobs, never home, a child raising herself with a house key around her neck. A tiny apartment in a bad neighborhood. Crushing debt that would follow the girl her whole childhood. A little girl who deserved so much better than a father too broke and too tired to really be there. He made it sound reasonable. He made it sound kind. He made walking out on a dying baby and coming back 5 years later for a rich woman's convenience sound like the tender return of a loving mother. And Nathan sat there and felt the case slipping, because the man was good, and the numbers were real, and for a few minutes it looked like money was going to win the way money usually does. And then Nathan's lawyer stood up. And she told the true story. She told about the plastic chair. She put those 2 nurses on the stand, and they told the judge in plain steady words about the young father who never left his baby's side for 2 months, who they'd had to order to go home and sleep, who they'd never once seen falter. She showed the school records, the perfect attendance at every parent event, the doctor's visits, the 5 unbroken years of a man who gave up sleep and money and any life of his own so his daughter would never go without. And then she laid down the other record, the empty one. The 5 years of total silence from the woman, now standing in an expensive suit asking for custody. 5 years. Not one phone call. Not one card. Not $1. Not one question. And then she called Grace Bennett to the stand. Grace told the judge who she was. The night nurse who'd kept that baby breathing through the dark. And she told him, steady and clear, that she'd left nursing wondering if any of it had ever mattered, and then found that same little girl 5 years later by pure chance, healthy and happy and loved, being raised by a father who had moved heaven and earth to keep her alive and keep her close. She looked right at the judge and she said, I have sat with a lot of families in a lot of hospitals, on the best days of their lives and the very worst. I know what love looks like, and I know what it doesn't. That man did not abandon his daughter when she was dying, and he will not abandon her now. The woman asking you to move that child is the one who did exactly that. I would stake my life on which home that little girl belongs in. The courtroom was dead silent when she finished. Even Diane's expensive lawyer didn't have anything to say to it. The judge took a recess. It felt like a year. Nathan sat on that hard bench with Lily's small hand in his and could barely breathe. And when the judge came back, he looked at Diane in her expensive clothes, and he looked at Nathan in his one good shirt, and he looked for a long moment at a little girl swinging her feet in a chair too big for her, oblivious, coloring on a scrap of paper the bailiff had given her. And he ruled. Custody stays with the father. Full custody. He said in all his years on the bench he had rarely seen a clearer case of who had actually raised a child, and that the court was not in the business of handing children over to whoever happened to have the most money and the least history of showing up. He said a lot of things, but that was the one Nathan would remember for the rest of his life. The least history of showing up. Diane's petition was denied. Every part of it. Nathan Cole broke down right there in the courtroom. 5 years of holding it together, of being strong because there was no one else to be strong, and it all came out of him at once, right there on that hard wooden bench. He pulled Lily into his arms and he held on and he cried, and the thing was, for the first time in half a decade, he wasn't crying alone. Because Grace was right there beside him, her hand on his shoulder, crying too, and Lily patted both their faces with her small hands, confused and a little delighted, and told them not to be sad, and neither of them could explain that these were the other kind of tears. That was 2 years ago now. Nathan and Grace didn't fall in love all at once. It wasn't like that, and maybe that's why it lasted. It grew slow, the way the real thing does, over school pickups and shared dinners at that same little apartment and 100 small ordinary days. Grace started coming by to check on Lily, and then to check on Nathan, and then just because the three of them together felt like something none of them wanted to end. She'd come into their lives to save Lily, twice now, and somewhere along the way, without either of them deciding it, she'd started saving Nathan too. Pulling him back out from behind that wall, one ordinary evening at a time. And he found he was doing the same for her, filling a quiet that she'd carried for years without ever naming it. She'd spent 3 years wondering if her work had ever mattered, if she'd made any difference at all. And she'd found her answer sitting in a diner booth eating pancakes. But then she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. A little girl who reached for her hand. A tired good man who'd forgotten he was worth choosing. A family, waiting on the other side of a broken glass on a diner floor. And Nathan, the man who'd sworn off love for good in the cab of a truck, staring at a windshield in the dark, learned that he had been wrong about the one thing he was most certain of in this world. They married last spring. Small wedding, just the people who mattered. Lily was the flower girl, 7 years old now, healthy as anything, strong as anything, and she called Grace her mom before the day was even out, easy as breathing, like she'd been waiting to. And Grace cried the happy kind of tears, the very same tears she'd cried on that diner floor 2 years before, kneeling in the broken glass in front of the little fighter she never forgot. Sometimes Nathan thinks about that night. The dropped fork. The broken glass across the tiles. Hitting his knees on that diner floor at the lowest moment of his whole life, dead certain that love was a thing that happened to other people, people with more to offer than a tired man in a delivery uniform. And he thinks about how completely wrong he was. Because love didn't come knocking the way he expected it to. It didn't show up polished and easy. It walked into an ordinary diner on an ordinary Tuesday and knelt down on the floor in the broken glass, not for him at all, but for his little girl. And that, it turned out, was exactly how a man like Nathan needed to be found. Not swept off his feet. Met on his knees at his lowest, by someone who saw what he'd done and thought it was worth something. Here's what I want you to take from this one. Nathan Cole gave up on love because he thought love was something you had to earn with money, or looks, or an easy life. He thought a broke, tired, worn-out single dad was past being chosen. He was wrong. Because the truest love in this world isn't drawn to the shiny people. It's drawn to the ones who stay. The ones who show up. The ones who hit their knees on a diner floor to keep their kid from getting cut. Grace didn't kneel down for a wealthy man or a handsome one. She knelt for the father who never left. And if you've ever felt like the world passed you by because you didn't have enough to offer, remember Nathan. Remember that the people worth having don't measure what's in your wallet. They measure whether you stayed. And staying, it turns out, is the one thing that can't be bought.